Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming here. We starting a bit late because we thought more of your colleagues would actually turn up. But what we're going to do is keep the proceedings quite informal. I don't know how many of you actually participated in previous sessions we've had, but the idea is that we'll take you through a few slides, and then you can ask us questions. Should you have any questions at the end of it. The presentation will be done both by myself and Jane Curran, who is the Director of the Civil Service Reform Management Unit that is at the forefront of driving these reforms. So let's start off with the first slide. There's many issues regarding the retirement age. I want to give you the few facts regarding the retirement age. Retirement age was reduced to 55 in 1987. It used to be 60. Rambuka came along and changed the retirement age from 60 to 55. And then it continued at the age of 55 until 2000, when the Garasa government then changed it from 55 to 60. There are many different reasons as to people speculate as to why the retirement age was reduced to 55 in 87. Some people say because he wanted to get rid of a whole heap of civil servants, probably because of their ethnicity. Back in 2000, why was it put up to 60? Some people say that it was put up to 60 because Garasa wanted some people to stay within the system. Whatever the reasons were, they are the facts as to when the retirement age became 55, when it was put up to 60. I can tell you why we specifically reduced it to 55, and that was of course done in 2007. We reduced the retirement age to 55 because of course today nearly 70% of the entire population is below the age of 40. So the reason behind that was that we wanted more younger people to come within the civil service. And of course there was a challenge to that retirement age by one of the unions back in 2000, 2008. And then of course the High Court did rule, and the Court of Appeal also ruled, that government had the ability to reduce the retirement age from 60 to 55. Of course, we have a provision, some of you may know about it, that if you retire once you turn 55, if you then, you can be actually recruited back into the system if the skill sets that you have is something that is scarce. So for example, there are certain skill sets that we don't have. For example, doctors, for example, some of the areas within the nursing cadre, for example, things like engineers, etc., or other areas could be, for example, foresters, where there may be not enough good people or qualified people for that particular skill set, so they can actually be retained on a yearly contract thereafter. But the whole idea is to ensure that we have succession planning. What are the objectives of the reform, the civil service reforms? Of course, the idea is to improve the working conditions. As you know, that we've increased the salaries, the allowances, and the idea, of course, is to have better and transparent decision-making processes within the civil service itself. There are numerous times, I can tell you dozens and dozens of times that I've personally, myself and other people have said that how certain people have got promotions or got demotions or transfers simply because they know people within the system. What the system now does create, it creates a lot of more transparency in the decision-making process under the OMRS. As you know, for example, recently we've also increased the meal allowance, from $9 to $20. There's been a lot of debate about it. For example, $9 may be okay in Tavua, but $9 in Nandi or Suba is not okay allowance. Of course, some people have said, well, $20 is a lot of money for Tavua if you get a meal allowance. But of course, $20 may be just enough in Nandi or Denrao, for example, if you accompany a minister. So we took we erred on the side of caution, so we'd rather have it higher than to have it lower. So this is why we've increased it to $20. There are other conditions that are being looked at. It's not just also, of course, just about money, but it's also the environment that you do work in, access to training, etc. The reforms also takes into account the constitutional authority of the permanent secretary. As you know, that your contracts are between yourself and your permanent secretary. And the permanent secretary, of course, represents the ministry. The PSC, of course, does not actually retain you. The PSC, as provided for under the law, the PSC only employs the permanent secretaries. They don't employ you. So the standard that needs to be set is that the permanent secretaries have to ensure that they themselves comply with the law. And I'll come to that issue a bit later on. But part of the civil service reform is also attract and retain good people. We are seeing more people now from outside the service who are actually applying for positions, and which is a good thing because we want more and more people to find the civil service an attractive employer, or government to be an attractive employer. Similarly, we also want people within your ministries to have specific career paths. As you know, the civil service has been very much driven by positions or titles. That's what we have. You know, somebody likes to become the senior administrative officer, then you become the principal administrative officer. And that actually only assured you your pay rise. So normally you would be on a particular position, and normally when they put you at that position, they peg you at the lower end of the scale. Jane can talk a lot more about this. If you see that the scale salaries that you have, the existing system prior to this, the system prior to before the implementation, the band was actually not very wide. You normally sit there, and you would not have the opportunity to be able to move within the band itself. So a lot of people would stay, for example, within the ministry. So they would be, say, for example, working for Ministry of Industry and Trade, and they'd be at a particular position. In order for them to get a pay rise, they would want to have a change in the title. So they look for positions within government somewhere else. So even though you'd be within the Ministry of Industry and Trade, you developed a whole lot of knowledge about that particular ministry. Because you did not have the ability to get a pay rise while staying in that position, you look for a position somewhere else. So you see a position in Ministry of Mangroves. You know nothing about mangroves. You'll apply for a position there because you want to get a pay rise. What the new system does is allows you to stay within the position itself but have continuous pay rise. That's the most critical part. So because we also as a government, as an employer, if for example you spend some time in a ministry, we've had for example people say who gain a lot of knowledge about say international trade or in foreign affairs or industry and trade, whatever, or even in the Ministry of Forest. They may be there for 10 years, they've been to all these conferences, they know about the position, they know about the job, but they actually leave that because they want to get a pay rise. When they move to some other ministry, we lose that knowledge. That knowledge that they have, this experience that they have, we lose it because, and even though it may be their passion about forestry, they move to another ministry because they don't have the ability to get a pay rise if they stay within the system. That's the issue. So we want people to have career paths in the specific areas that they feel passionate about. Some of you may be very passionate about, say, forestry or whatever the case may be. And we want you to stay there. You have a career progression. And even though you may be in a particular position, you continuously get a pay rise. And as we'll tell you about the performance management system. The other issue, of course, is that we want to be able to ensure that under the OMRS, the old way of thinking was, just because I've been in a particular position, say, for 15 years, and if this lady has been there, say, for 5 years or 7 years, when you actually have a promotion or a job advertised within the ministry, generally it was that I'll get it because I've been there longer than her. But I may be spending half my time in the grog bowl. I may be turning up to work very late. I may not be a high performer. She may be a high flyer. She may be very good at what she does. And she should equally have the same opportunity to apply for that position. So that's what the system creates. It creates the ability for people to apply for position, notwithstanding the fact that they may not have necessarily been in the position for much longer period. It recognizes high flyers. Now, OMRS, I've spoken to you about that. OMRS is about knowledge, experience, skills, ability. What we have said now, of course, these are new systems that have been put in place. Some people have said to us, oh, OMRS at that particular position did not work. Of course, no system is 100%. But now you have the ability to actually appeal. So for example, if all of these ladies sitting here apply for a particular position under OMRS, and this lady may feel aggrieved by the fact that the OMRS system was not followed, she can actually appeal. And where does she appeal that to? She actually appeals that to the PSC, Public Service Commission. Why does she appeal to the Public Service Commission? Because it is the responsibility of the permanent secretary to make sure that the system is adhered to, the procedures are adhered to. And the permanent secretary is answerable to the PSC. PSC employs the permanent secretary. If you have a permanent secretary that is not adhering to the procedures, he or she can be suspended, can be terminated, whatever the case may be, however the PSC wants to deal with it. So if she, for example, feels aggrieved by the particular process, she then can file an appeal. The appeal is paper-based. There you go, it's set up there, it's paper-based. She submits it directly to the PSC. We now have a full-time PSC, a commissioner, who sits full-time and hears all appeals. When she appeals, she does not have to go through the permanent secretary. She does not have to go through an immediate supervisor. She does not have to tell anybody. She simply puts in the paper submission for the appeal. And then the commissioner then decides whether the process was followed or not. Now, if the commissioner, for example, says yes, the procedure was not adhered to, was not followed, the commissioner can then give a directive to the permanent secretary to say, do the entire thing again. The permanent secretary will never know who actually made the appeal, because we don't want anybody to be victimized. That's how the system works. So you have a right of appeal. Nobody will get to know. It's paper-based. They actually have the ability to investigate. Now, that's how you actually correct the system should there be any issues pertaining to that. If we now go back to the previous slide, over here you'll see that when you now have the OMRS, when you have a panel of 3 people, now what we've said, you must have at least one member who needs to be outside the ministry. So we find a lot of, for example, I know Ministry of Economy, when they have a panel, they get somebody from another ministry. In some of the other positions, the higher positions, I think in Ministry of Education, for example, they get somebody from outside government altogether. So they have one person from the ministry, they have somebody from outside the ministry, and they get somebody outside from government altogether. That's how you manage the independence and ensure there is independence within the particular panels that actually is choosing people. So there you go, in band J and above. Band J and above, you have somebody from outside the ministry also. And all the people who are actually the panelists must be trained. I had a situation some months back when in Ministry of Economy. I found out when the recommendation was sent up to me that one of the persons who were actually sitting in the panel was not trained. We sent it back, so they had to go through the entire process again. Because we need to ensure that people who sit in the OMRS panel are people that you train. I would encourage you to also get that level of training so you can also sit on panels and also appreciate how the system works. So there's a procedure, a review, the process is up and running. You can appeal through the system. It's all available to you. It's also available on the website. So as you know that through the reform, this particular reform process, jobs where the increase in salary is over 15% must be advertised. So if you are in a position, or in the jobs that have less than 15% pay rise, the jobs aren't advertised. If there's more than 15%, it has to be advertised. Until such time, the acting arrangements have to be put in place to ensure that there is no disruption to the service itself. Again, contract and acting letter issued together by the ministry, the teachers and nurses in respect of that, the expression of interest in accordance with OMRS, and of course, where there are large areas, for example, like with health, there will be advanced plan being prepared and advertised. But of course, you've already seen in some of the other ministries, the advertisements have already gone out, the smaller ones, as opposed to the nurses and the teachers. Now, one of the things we've said, that discipline and the reforms, the guidelines actually promote what we call positive discipline. So the example that I've used previously in the sessions we've held, you know, we have a lot of parents that they're quite active now. So, for example, they may lodge a complaint against a teacher. One classic example is this. A lot of teachers in Fiji double up as counselors, as student counselors. A lot of these teachers don't necessarily have the formal training to be counselors, because very few people in Fiji pursue counseling as a career. Very few people in Fiji. You don't see specialist counselors. A lot of teachers, because of the passion, you know, they want to actually pursue, they want to help out with counseling. So, for example, if a teacher is pulled up because there's a complaint lodged by a parent or a student, and indeed they may find that the teacher may not necessarily have done the right thing or should have done something when they did not do it. The issue then is what you call positive discipline. They may say, yes, the teacher did the wrong thing as far as the counseling is concerned, but the reason why the teacher did not do something or did not do something is because he or she did not have the training. So the positive discipline would be, the outcome would be, we need to send him or her for training. We need to send him or her for a particular level of exposure so he or she can become better. That's what you call positive discipline. You may find out that the person may have done something incorrect or something wrong, but it was not necessarily their fault. It was because of the lack of training provided by the system. So therefore, the positive discipline would be to send that person and let them get that level of exposure that is necessary for them to be able to do the job properly. That's what you call positive discipline. Principles of natural justice. We have to make sure it does happen. So many times, even before these reforms, even we've had complaints, prior to the appointment of government, to say that natural justice was not followed. What that essentially means is if there is a complaint against me, then natural justice means is that the complaint then must be put to me, and then I should have sufficient time to be able to respond to it. And then my response is then actually assessed. And then, of course, we have the ability to communicate the decision and to explain the decision. All of these things are components of natural justice. Of course, part of it is the improvements of supervision management, improving communications. So many of you are actually not necessarily given the right level of communication. Sometimes you don't know what your supervisor wants specifically. The lines of communication is not good. We need to have training available. We have sessions that will be conducted by the Civil Service Reform Management Unit and also the Civil Service Ministry itself. There will be huge focus on training. And of course, we can get your suggestions after this in terms of how we can improve the communication available for training. The contracts, the regulations actually state that you can get a contract for up to 5 years. Civil servants, all civil servants can get contracts up to 5 years. The current contracted officers for the balance of the current contract period, permanent officers for maximum up to 5 years. No impact on ability to seek loans confirmed by banks. A lot of the unions were going around saying that if you get contracts, therefore the banks won't give you a loan. That's absolute rubbish. You can get loans. All the banks have come out and said just because you've got a contract, it doesn't mean that you won't be able to get a loan. Everybody outside this room that does not work for government, all of them have contracts. Nobody has a permanent job or a job guaranteed for life. That's how all the system works. So your ability to get a loan is not affected at all by the fact that you have contracts. Already prior to the reform, 70% of the civil servants were on contracts in any case. Only 30% actually weren't on contracts. Of course, your contract, just because you have a contract, it does not mean that there is insecurity of employment, because nobody can terminate your contract without necessarily going through the discipline guideline and natural justice provision. So the permanent secretary cannot wake up one morning and say, okay, I'm going to terminate his contract. They have to go through a particular process, and there has to be various reasons for it. And of course, you have the ability, if you do believe that you have been wrong, you have the ability to go to the employment tribunal. If you're not happy with that, you have the ability to go to the High Court of Fiji. All those procedures are all set out for you. The contracts are very essential, ladies and gentlemen, because it actually protects you and protects the employer too. Because the contract actually stipulates the level of salary that you're going to have. So nobody can change that. That's actually protected by law with the contract being in place. And therefore, the entire relationship is actually governed by the contract in itself. That gives you the high level of protection that you do require. Now, those of you who actually have not signed the contract, you don't have to sign the contract if you don't want to sign the contract, but you won't get the new pay rise. You stay on the pay rise, you stay on the pay that you have. Because of course, we cannot pay you the new salary unless you actually agreed to accept the salary, because that's what the contract does. It actually stipulates the salary that you'll be getting. So that's the situation. But of course, then the salary also, if for example, help me out here, Jane, if I'm incorrect. If for example, currently, your salary says $20,000, and that equates to a particular position. Let's say, hypothetically, senior administrative officer. Now, if your salary, don't sign the contract, you still get $20,000. A senior administrative officer may not necessarily be getting $20,000 anymore under the new system. They may be getting $25,000. I'm using this as a hypothetical. So if you earn $20,000, that salary must equate to a different position, correct? That must equate to a different position. So you remember that. If you stay on the same salary, it must equate to the level of responsibility that that amount of money equates to put it simply. Now, we've also got we're doing performance assessment. So what we are doing now with the civil service reform, we're trying to get everybody's base salary right. Okay? Once we get the base salary right, thereafter, then we have what we call performance-based assessment. So if, again, using these ladies here in the front, they'll be individually then assessed on a yearly basis or whatever time period has been agreed to, 18 months, whatever the case may be. Now, if assuming that all of them are doing the same job, they should not all necessarily get the same pay rise. Because this lady may be somebody who's a high flyer. This lady may be coming into work at 9 o'clock and leaving, start combing her hair at 4 o'clock to leave at 4:30. So if they were all to be given the same pay rise, she would feel disincentivized. She would say, why should I work any harder? If she's working harder, if she's a high performer, she should get a higher pay rise. Her assessment will be that she should be given a higher pay rise as opposed to this lady who's not actually performing well. If they all got the same pay rise, then it's an incentive for her to do the same thing as she's doing. You're saying, what's the point of working hard? What's the point of me answering the phone call on time? Because I'm not going to get rewarded for it. So that's how what you call performance-based assessment. That's what will happen. So some of you will probably, if you're thinking ahead, you'll realize that apart from this pay rise, you can very quickly in the next year or so get another pay rise very quickly. And that's what the system does. The system actually allows for much more quicker turnaround times in terms of your salary increments and recognition of your performance. The old system was that, you wait every 5 years or 10 years, then you have this big discussion, and then you get across the pay rise, 10%. In fact, last year when we were discussing with the unions, Rajeshwar Singh said to us, he said, give us a 15% pay rise across the board. And I said, no. He said, well, okay, let's negotiate. So maybe he would have settled for maybe 10% pay rise across the board. But what good would that have done? Some civil servants have got pay rises up to 80%, 70%, 40%, 30%. I did say to them, don't shortchange your members. Because once we do the evaluation, some people have the potential to get higher pay rises. Of course, the system also means that now everybody, irrespective of the pay rise that you've received, whether it's been from 5%, whether it's been up to 80%, the now system allows you to be able to be assessed on a more regular basis. And that's what the system actually does improve your ability to move within the steps. You see, movement up the steps in salary budget will pay in price with budget cycle. So again, you have the ability to get those increments a lot more quicker based on your level of performance. See, ultimately for us as a government, the people who we actually are ultimately responsible to are the ordinary Fijians. They are our clients. Civil servants need to understand that they are our clients. In the same way we said to the teachers, there's a lot of issues about the Ministry of Education headquarters, about how they're managing teachers. So what we said to the headquarters people, your clients are the teachers. You have to look after the teachers. There's what, 9,000 teachers? 10,000 teachers. So the head office needs to look after the head teachers, or needs to look after the teachers, because if they don't look after the teachers, then the teachers won't perform well. If the teachers don't perform well, it affects about 220,000 young Fijians who are the students. And for us, we need to ensure that the education system is doing well and performing well. The economy is growing pretty fast. We need to ensure the people who leave our schools are actually trained well, educated well, have the knowledge base. The only way we can do that is, one of the critical issues, is that the teachers are looked after and the teachers perform well. It's a whole client mentality. And unfortunately, a lot of the civil servants don't necessarily have the client mentality. We need to have a client mentality. A lot of ordinary Fijians are telling us this is really good because we want the civil servants to perform well, so we get better service. Basically, we need them to be more accountable. And that's what the reforms actually does. It holds us to be a lot more accountable to the ordinary Fijian, but also at the same time provides an environment for you to be able to have a career path. So just go back. Yeah, so just to highlight to you the performance assessment, we're still doing further work on that. The World Bank is helping us with that. There'll be further consultations in October and November, and the guidelines for the performance assessment will of course be set out, will be finalized by the end of 2017. Next one, please. This is where Jane comes in. Oh, this is mine too. Okay. Of course, job evaluation background, we had the guidelines that were approved and released in January 2017. The person and the position are considered separately. You have to understand that. It's not driven by the personalities. It's actually driven by the level of responsibility a particular position has. So for example, I'll give you an example of the Ministry of Education. We have people within the Ministry of Education, their job is to assess head teachers and principals. But the level of responsibility is actually quite little. So maybe 5 or 6 of them, they come to work every day in the morning, and then their job is to see how the individual schools perform. The mentality was that their salary must be the same as the principal of the head teacher, or maybe even higher, because they are the ones assessing the principal of the head teacher. But their level of responsibility is very little when you think about it. Think about the head teacher of the principal who comes to school in the morning. They may have 1,000 students yelling and screaming. They may have 50 or 60 teachers. They may have a boarding school they have to deal with. So every day they come to work, the level of responsibility is quite high. As opposed to, just because I'm assessing him and he's the principal doesn't mean that I should have a higher pay. Because my level of responsibility is actually quite paltry compared to what this person has. This person simply comes to work. He doesn't have to manage anybody in the morning. He just comes to work, sit at his desk. Whereas the principal, the head teacher, the head of department has got a much higher level of responsibility, much higher level of risk. And imagine if a kid dies in the schoolyard, who will be held responsible? Not the person assessing the principal, but the principal, him or herself. In the same way when you work in a bank, if you go to the bank, you know the teller takes the money. There may be, for example, if the teller makes a mistake, could be $1 or $2 out of place. But there are other people who are sitting in the back room in a bank, probably 3-4 years out of university, sitting in a room, and they do foreign exchange dealings. They sell and buy a foreign exchange. They make a mistake, the bank can lose $500,000 in one transaction. The teller makes a mistake, they can lose $2 or $3. So the level of risk is higher. The level of exposure is higher. So accordingly, that person gets a lot more than the teller. So just remember that this reform actually recognizes the level of responsibility you have. How many people you are actually supervising? How many people actually held accountable to you? That's also something that's taken into consideration. Bands are therefore determined by the requirements of the job. The qualification requirements are only one factor considered in the evaluation. So for example, again using the teachers as an example, some people, at one stage in Fiji, everybody wanted to go off and do an MBA at USP. So just because, for example, if these two ladies are holding a particular position, assuming that they are foresters, the job requirement is that they must have a knowledge regarding forestry. But if one of them decides to go and do an MBA, it does not automatically mean that the person who's done the MBA therefore should get a higher pay. Because MBA is not necessarily a requirement for the job. You see, we have to ensure, it may be, for example, when they apply for a job, if there's a requirement for some type of, say, business skill sets, could be taken into consideration. But the level of qualification must be suitable for the job that you actually applied for. or the position that you do hold. We had a situation, for example, with the teachers. Some teachers have said, well, you know, the job requirement, I think, for primary school is a diploma. A diploma to be a primary school teacher. So somebody said, well, you know, I went off and got a degree. I said, yes, but just because I've got a degree, it doesn't mean I'm a better teacher than a person who's got a diploma. A person who's a diploma, we found in many cases, would be a much, much better teacher. Does not mean that the person with a degree should get the higher salary. And the police officers here, just because a police officer, for example, may have a particular qualification, does not mean that it's a job requirement itself. A person may be a much better police officer in the way that they liaise with the general members of the public. Job evaluation is based on the competence, that the people are doing the job are competent. And of course, we have workforce management, there are sufficient people to undertake the volume of work. I'll give you an example. When we were appointed in 2007 in the Ministry of Justice, I went around, you know, talking to people and asking them what job they were doing, what was they, what responsibilities they had. So there was one position within the Ministry of Justice, and that position was, that person's job was to look after all the vehicles within the Ministry of Justice. As you know, previously, we had people who looked after vehicles in the respective ministry. So he was being paid a full-time job. And then I said, how many vehicles are there in the Ministry of Justice? There's only one vehicle. Only one vehicle. So because there was a position, they felt they had to fill it. But the level of responsibility was zero. In the private sector, where I came from, the vehicles were actually looked after by the secretaries. The secretaries had to just make sure the vehicles went for servicing on time. But here we had a position in government where that person's job was to look after the vehicles, and there's only one vehicle. So you see, what that also means is that we have the ability in the government for people to multi-skill, multitask. You can multitask and get a higher salary too. So if that level of responsibility that this lady is doing, if she's given more responsibility, she can get paid more, because the level of responsibility, as you see there, is a lot higher, and therefore she should be paid more. You don't have to create so many different positions to do only one thing at a time. In that way also your career path is a lot better. Next one, please. Okay, do you have those things? I just wanted to also show you that apart from the fact that you've got this pay rise, therefore you put more money home in the pocket, the fact that the income tax threshold is now increased from $16,000 to $30,000 actually means you've also got a bit of indirect pay. Sorry, I forgot about that. So, let's take an example of, say, somebody, let me go down to the third one. So over here. So, just show that part. Okay. So, before the job evaluation exercise, say a registered nurse in Band F is getting paid $17,000. Because the tax threshold was $16,000, they paid a tax of $107. The total take-home pay was $17,000. Okay? We move next, please. Now, after the job evaluation, the salary, sorry, just show that. After the job evaluation exercise, this $17,000 salary went from $17,000 to $20,000. Tax threshold is $16,000, you pay $291. Therefore, the total take-home pay was $19,871. In other words, the total pay increase of $2,400. Okay? Now, because we've increased the income tax threshold to $30,000, the new pay is $20,000. She no longer pays any tax. After tax $20,000, a total pay rise of $2,700. So if the tax threshold had stayed at 16, she would have taken $2,400. but she now takes $2,700 because of the fact that the tax threshold has increased to $30,000. So we've given you numerous examples. Maybe just go down, please. So, any other? That's it. Can anybody give me a position that you hold that we can bring close to show you an example? What are you? Any surveyors? Sorry? Yes.
Yes. Yes. Ben B, registered nurse Ben B, Ben B and Ben G, as well as NO6, Ben B and Ben F. When we basically, at the moment, with the current contract that we are having now, there's clearly a vast demarcation of nurses within that same category, NO6. When we take into consideration the years of experience, with a person who just graduated 3 years, today is now tagged with a person who's been sitting on 15 plus years, 10 plus years of service right now. And that is the reality is what we have with the current contract that we have now. And I can show you evidence.
I'm going to go through the factors that were considered in the job evaluation as soon as the Minister has finished with this slide. And I'll explain how experience was considered in all of the job evaluations, and I'll come back to your question at that point, okay?
That's why I asked you whether you're looking at this slide. This slide is about tax, not about what you're talking about. Jane will talk to you about that later. It's about tax. So I want you to be able to understand. If you have any questions on this. So a person, for example, let me give you another example. Say somebody who was a senior surveyor. A senior surveyor, before the reform was getting $37,000. Income tax threshold, they had $16,000. They used to pay $2,000 tax. Total take-home pay was $29,000. Now the senior surveyor has jumped from $31,000 to $43,000. Just show me that, please. Go back, Benny. Okay, just anyway. Senior surveyor here. Jump from $31,000, their pay rise is up to $43,000. So they've got a pay rise of what? About, say about $12,000. What percent? They've got a 38% pay rise, senior surveyor. So now if the income tax threshold was $16,000, they would have paid tax of $4,000, $39,000 take-home pay. In other words, a pay rise altogether of $9,000, $9,800. Now, because the income tax threshold has actually increased to $30,000, they pay less tax also. Because remember, ladies and gentlemen, just because the income tax threshold has gone up to $30,000, it does not mean that they are the only people who've got a tax cut. Everybody above that has also got a tax cut. Because the way the tax system works is when you increase the income tax threshold, the next percentage up after the threshold also comes down. So before, so the person who may be paying 10% before after 30,000 is now probably paying 7%. So everybody, in fact, in Fiji has got a tax cut, except those people who are earning less than $30,000 don't pay any tax at all anymore. So that person now, with the income tax threshold being increased to $30,000, the tax cut across the board has actually got a tax cut, has got a pay rise of $11,000 even after paying tax a year. So this is with the threshold being at $16,000. This is with the threshold being now at $30,000. Instead of paying $4,200 tax, they're now paying $2,300 tax, and therefore the entire take-home pay after tax is $11,000. So that's what I needed you to understand to be able to know exactly what the income tax threshold increase has meant for you. So all of you actually, apart from your pay rise, you've also got a bit more money in your pocket because of the fact that your income tax levels have all come down. Guideline, that's good? Sure. Okay, I'll hand over to Jane now and she'll talk to you about some of these issues. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. So I will come to your question, okay? I'll just go through some background as to how the guidelines actually work together. So the Minister has talked about the different guidelines that are coming in with the reforms. So it's been useful in these other sessions to give people just an overview of how they work together. So people get quite confused because this is HR that's none of your business, it's not your core business, it's ours. So job evaluation is how we determine the level of the job, the band that the job sits on. That's job evaluation, and it's about the duties of the job and not about the person who's doing the job. The Open Merit Recruitment Selection Guideline is how you get the job. Okay, so that's our system of advertising and how we run the selection process. So that's how you get the job. Discipline is about how we correct behaviour if it's not what we want people to be doing in the job. And lastly, performance management is about how we reward people who are performing perhaps better than others. It's how we encourage people to make sure that they fulfil all of the requirements of the job. And it's how we recognise people's different level of experience in the job. So it's not about years of service. Performance management, it's not just about having an extra year in the job. So increments in the future, and I'll talk about them a little bit more in a couple of slides' time, but increments will be paid, but not based on time. So it's not about whether you've been in the job for 10 years and the person sitting next to you has been in the job for 5. It's about your level of performance in the job. Okay? So that's what performance management is about. It's about recognising the different effort that people put into their job. Because just because you've been in a job longer doesn't mean you're actually putting more effort into the job or necessarily producing better outcomes in the job. We all know people who, when they've been in the job for a long time, perhaps they lose interest. Perhaps they're not putting the effort in that they used to put in. And we want to make sure that we properly reward the people who are putting in more effort. That's what the Minister was talking about earlier when he was talking about the performance guideline. I will come back to that when I talk about how the salary bands work. So I'll go on to some of the issues with job evaluation. So most of you were involved in the job evaluation process because we asked everyone to fill out job documentation, to fill out the job evaluation questionnaire. One of the biggest issues that we had when we were trying to evaluate the jobs was that documentation people didn't take it seriously. From our side, when we're reading some of the job documentation, it looks like people filled it out in a hurry, or they didn't put a lot of effort in. Perhaps they didn't understand what the end result would be. So the end result in some occupations has been that we've had to revisit and review the results of the job evaluation because the documentation didn't accurately reflect the level of responsibility that perhaps those jobs actually had. And there is a review process, so that's fine, that's what it's there for. But just as one example, some of the inconsistencies that came in the job documentation when the job evaluation leadership team, which is myself as the director, as the chair, and 2 permanent secretaries. So when we're moderating the committee results from the job evaluation, what we tried to do was say, okay, well, I'd look at a particular job. And that job says that it reports to another job. So position X says it reports to position Y. So we want to make sure that we get the relationships right between those 2 jobs in the evaluation. So I go and I find the job description for position Y. But it doesn't say that position X reports to it. It says someone else reports to it. There's no mention of position X, so they don't match. So then we're trying to get more information from the ministries to try and work out and make sure that we've got the relationships right between the jobs, because we don't want to have a subordinate position necessarily at a higher level than a job that it's reporting to just because the documentation wasn't written properly. Okay? So there was a lot more checking, and that's particularly why some of the tranches took a little bit longer to come out than what we had hoped. Okay? So some of the documentation was also quite late, so that this isn't your fault at your level most likely, but so ministries were given deadlines, usually about a month before the training was run. We asked for the job descriptions to come in so that we could sort them into batches and have them all registered. And sometimes we were still chasing that documentation when the committees were meeting. So we'd discover that, for example, a particular group of jobs, we had no documentation. And we knew that we were looking for particular jobs. Like we know, for example, that we've got veterinary officers in the Ministry of Agriculture, but we had no job descriptions. So we had to keep going back to the ministry because we can't evaluate a job if we don't have the documentation. So they're just some of the high-level issues that happened with job evaluation, and they just slowed the process down. So, rumours and issues that are out there about job evaluation. There's a lot of inaccurate information. Okay. No one is going down in salary. Okay. The payroll reports that I have show that everyone is being offered an increase in pay. There have been some instances where jobs have changed level, okay, but the person is tagged to a band separately where they will still receive a salary increase. They may change jobs, but everyone is being offered a salary increase. Okay? No one is being offered a contract at any salary less than what they were offered or what they were on before. Anyone who's been offered a salary that is lower than what they're currently on needs to, in the first instance, go back to their HR department because it's not right. Okay. And at the end of the presentation, we have an email address. If you don't have any luck with your HR department, you can send your inquiries direct to us and we can also check for you. The only examples that we've seen are where someone was acting, okay? Because, of course, the contract is based on your substantive salary. And then you will get a new acting letter, which will also provide an increase in pay. So there are no salary decreases. So anyone who's been offered anything that looks like a decrease, you need to check it with your HR because it's definitely not right. I mentioned some positions have asked for reviews. That's fine. The guideline actually has a provision in it for a review. It's a review of the band. And what you need to be able to show is that perhaps the documentation that was originally submitted was missing something. That maybe there was some information that wasn't properly included, some part of complexity, and I'm going to go through the factors, the sorts of things that we look at when we evaluate the jobs. So if you think that your job is not on the right band, you can request a review through your permanent secretary. But you have to show that something is different to what was evaluated, because if we evaluate the same documentation, it will come out in the same level. The pay start date. So the start date is the first pay fortnight that starts in the month that you sign the contract. Okay? So people who signed their contract in August, it was the 13th of August. People who sign in September, it's the 10th of September. People who sign in October, it's the 8th of October, because it's the first pay fortnight in that month, okay? Not the first of the month. And you can sign any time during that month and it will be backdated to the first pay that started in that month. So the factors that we consider when we evaluate, we use a commercial methodology. It's called SP10. It's in partnership with PricewaterhouseCoopers. It's used by quite a few organisations in Fiji. And we trained 200 evaluators across the civil service in the methodology. We're one of the few organisations in Fiji that did its own evaluations. A lot of organisations pay the consultants to do it, but we trained our own people so that we would have that pool of people who understand the methodology. So all ministries and all occupations have at least some people trained in the methodology, and possibly some of you attended the training, because most of the people were from Suva and Nausori, and we're doing some more training in November to increase our pool of trained evaluators, because the thing with job evaluation is that it's not a one-off exercise. We need the capacity to be able to evaluate new jobs as they're created, or to evaluate jobs when they change. Okay? So these are the factors that we consider. The first one is education. It's the education that's required for the job, not the education that's held by the person who's currently sitting in the job. So we think back, we consider the position and the person completely separately. The person is about performance management, job evaluation is about the job. So it's the education that's actually required in order to do the job. So when we were talking to teachers, it was a diploma in primary, it was a degree in secondary. Okay? Nursing, it's a degree. Okay? So different occupations have different levels of qualification requirements for the job. If the person holds a higher qualification than that required for the job, it doesn't affect job evaluation because it's not about the person, it's about the job. When we do the performance assessment, we would expect that someone who has a higher qualification should be performing better than someone who has a lower qualification. So that's where that higher qualification gets recognised, when we do the performance assessment, okay? But not in job evaluation. One example where we did look at, for example, the different qualifications in nursing, okay? So you would have seen, it's on the snapshot, it was on the tax slide as well. So you've got nurses, NUO6s have gone to band F and band G. Band F nurses are the registered nurses, okay, the ones with the degree. The band G nurses, the ministry has created or upgraded the career path for nurses. They've created specialised nurses. So where midwives were in the same category as ward nurses before, now it's the midwives who've gone to band G because they have an additional qualification. It's one of the factors that pushed it up onto that higher band. Okay? So the band G nurses are the specialised nurses. That's what the ministry has now titled them as. They're called specialised nurses, and those positions will be advertised because it's a very big increase in pay and because they want to make sure that they get the right people into those jobs. It's not about having the qualification, it's about doing the work. Okay, but the qualification led to those positions going onto a higher band. So the next factor is experience, and it's about how much experience do you need in order to be able to undertake the duties of the job. How long does it take to learn the job? So some jobs, like a driver, okay, they only require a few months, okay, to learn the actual procedures that are required in the particular fleet that you're working in. But other jobs, if you're a consultant medical officer, take many, many years of experience to actually work your way up to that level, okay? So obviously they get different scores, and it's not about the person, it's not the number of years that the person has been sitting in the job, it's how long does it take before you would be fully competent at that job. So the third factor is complexity. This is where we start to look at how difficult is the job, okay? How predictable is the job? When I come to work every day, is it the same thing every day? Am I processing vouchers? Am I perhaps being a receptionist where the type of people that I see might vary, but it's pretty much the same thing all day, every day? Or is my job completely unpredictable? I don't know what to expect. Every day is a new adventure. Okay? Every day is different. So obviously there are different scores for those different types of predictability. The next one is scope. So how much control do you have? So in your work, how much control do you have over the resources and over actually managing your own work? Does someone tell you everything that you have to do, or do you know what you have to do, but you get to decide in what order or how you actually go about it? So that's scope. Problem solving, how much judgment is required? How many rules are available? Are there rules for everything you do, or do you have to make it up as you go along? Freedom to act is directly linked to the number of rules. Okay, so if you're problem solving, so if your problem solving is very high, then your freedom to act is generally very high as well. So how much can you make your own decisions about how you go about your work? Again, is someone telling you what to do all the time and how to do it, or do you have to make those decisions for yourself? The impact of your decisions, so we don't evaluate based on what happens if it goes wrong, because we assume competence. That was one of the key points in the earlier slide. We assume that people are able to do their jobs, but it's about assuming competence. What happens to the organisation as a result of your decisions? Okay? So can you make money for the organisation? Can you influence the outcomes of your organisation? Can you have a positive impact on the way your organisation is viewed? Okay, so that's impact. Interpersonal skills is about who you talk to in your job. So some people sit at a desk and never have to talk to anyone except for their immediate team members, but other people deal with the public, or they deal with senior officers from other organisations. So this is about what type of interpersonal skills do you need? Do you need interpersonal skills so that you can just relate to other people, or are you actually negotiating with people and trying to persuade them to a different point of view? So that's interpersonal skills. Authorities, do you have the authority to spend money and to hire and fire staff? And in the public sector, most people don't, because it's concentrated with the permanent secretary. But supervisors have some authority. Even though you may not be able to hire and fire, you are supervising staff. And people management is the last one, which is about the number of staff who report to the position. And this is the one that was a bit hard to figure out in a lot of the job descriptions, because people said they didn't give us totals. They gave us around about this number of people, but it actually changes the score.
Within the Ministry of Health, within the Ministry of Health, we go where we are posted to go or where we are sent to go. But in order to go and do a job, we need to be educated. We need to be specialized. Okay. It's there required for the job, not held by the person. If I'm a midwife and I'm sent to go and work in medical ward to be a supervisor, it meant I will not be accorded the salary that other midwives are given because I do not do the job as a midwife.
If the job is designated as requiring a midwife, then you would be paid as a midwife. But if the job is not designated as being a midwife, then no. Okay, it's not about you having the qualification, it's about the work that's required.
I think, we need to look at that as an indicator to a job evaluation. Because we cannot be going sweating everywhere to be able to be a skilled nurse or a midwife. And the ministry is sending us differently. That's not my problem. My problem is to get educated. But the ministry wants me to go and work somewhere. So why cannot I receive the salary that I'm supposed to be receiving according to my education? Otherwise, the nurses will not want to go and be educated.
So the ministry should not be sending people. Like if you win a job on Band G as a midwife and you're designated as a midwife, the ministry can't send you to a registered nurse post that is not a midwife because you're already on a higher level. Okay? The ministry, these are new positions. These positions never existed before, so the ministry has to recruit for them, and once you sit in a position, that's the position that you're in. They can't send you to a position that's at a lower level.
Thank you. That's generally that is what we want seen. But we're living in Fiji. Fiji is a small place. Everybody cannot be specialized. Therefore, people that are trained to be specialized, and if we do not have enough nurses to be able to do the work of other nurses, because initially we are all general nurses. And I don't know, it continues to disturb me if we are being educated and we are not looked at according to the education that we have. Because once you're educated, you are skillful. And when you go and perform, you are performing according to that expectation. Not as a general nurse, but as a specialized person, even though you're not in the place that you're supposed to be in.
So I think the basic answer to that is that the ministry needs to sort out the positions, and they're working on that, and they need to make sure that they're posting people to the positions and running the recruitment process so that you can be put into a position where you are able to use your specialised skills. But it is about the position.
Use the argument and say cannot specialise. We have to move along. We have to. Just because things have been done in a particular manner does not mean it has to continue in that particular manner. I accept the fact that you may not necessarily, for example, straight up have that level of specialization that's available, or that a lot of people specialize in different skill sets. We accept that. But what Jane is trying to also say is that it's the ministry's responsibility now to ensure that if, for example, what you are saying to me, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that if you are being sent to a particular posting, and where you may be, say, for example, a midwife, and you're getting a higher salary, and because you are required to do other skill sets and perform other functions, the issue there for you personally would be that you should not have a decrease in your salary. Okay? You should not have a decrease in salary. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. A midwife gets paid more than a general nurse. So a midwife would get paid more than a general nurse. So if you are saying that you are a midwife, or anybody else is a midwife, and goes to a posting where they are required to do other things, as long as your salary is not lower than what a midwife should get, that's the point. That's how the system corrects itself. So there are, for example, different ministries, not just Ministry of Health, but there are other ministries also. They need to re-look at how they actually set the positions. What are the requirements of the positions? So some of the ministries, some of the permanent secretaries actually also have to do a lot more job. But for you personally, the issue should be, are you being paid less than what you actually qualified in? And if you are going there to perform midwife positions or midwife responsibilities, then you should be given a midwife's salary. Sure.
I tell you, without the nurses, Ministry of Health will not be able to function. If you're a patient, you will know the job that we do. We can become doctors if you're a slow doctor. And I do not know why this happens so many years ago. I'm sorry, I'm not a nurse. I have retired from nursing. That's why I can talk because I have time. Yes, sorry, sir.
Ma'am, midwife 51. The midwife as nurses. Yeah. So if you have a look at the snapshot, the salary increase for nurses, the initial salary is 15% for a general nurse. But for a midwife, for the specialised nurses, it's 40-something.
Why do we start very less when comparing to the other medical people like pharmacists, laboratory technicians?
But it's not. But it's not. These are the factors. And if you, not all of the jobs are not listed on the sheet.
Why don't you let her finish so she can explain to you, then you maybe understand better. Go.
If you have a look at the jobs that require a similar qualification to nursing, so the jobs that require a degree, for example, secondary teachers, same band, okay? Entry-level pharmacists, same band, okay? The specialised nurses, because they require the higher qualification, have gone up to the higher band. Nurse practitioners, who require much more experience and higher qualifications, have gone up to a band that's actually higher than the medical officers. Okay? So you don't have a full list of all the jobs because they don't fit on a page. There's an A3 sheet of 6 pages that's been sent to each ministry that lists every single position. So I think you need to have a look at the whole list because we're actually quite confident that nurses have gone to the right band, and it provides for quite a big increase, not just the initial increase. So I think I might move on with the rest of the presentation to explain how the salary bands work and what everyone can expect in terms of subsequent pay increases. Is that okay? So the salary bands, you've got a copy of the salary bands. I didn't try and put them on a slide because they don't really fit very well. So you've got a copy of these. The bands were developed quite separately to the job evaluations. So the job evaluation sets the band that the position goes to. But the dollars that were placed on those bands, we didn't look at a job and say, oh, we need to give them a particular percentage pay increase. What we did was we looked at what the private sector pays for a similar level of skill and experience based on those 10 factors. Okay. So all the positions, including the GWEs, fit onto the bands. There's no more separate salary scales for the different occupations. So all your old salary scales, the LG, the NU, the LB, AC, ED, all of those are gone, okay? And everyone is now on the salary bands. The salary bands are benchmarked to the private sector. So we did a lot of research. We did a compensation benchmark survey. Was the first piece of research with the World Bank. Then we did a separate study through the World Bank for teachers and nurses to look at around the region, not what teachers and nurses are paid around the region, but what occupations are paid similarly to them. So this is coming back to the point about, we should be on the same band as positions that are similar to us. And the position, that's what's come out of that research. Then we also have the PricewaterhouseCoopers salary survey, which tells us for Fiji what different positions get paid. So benchmark to the private sector means that the midpoint, step 4 on each band, is benchmarked to the private sector. So that step 4 is what we call the competent point. So we expect that most people, when we introduce performance management, we'll move to step 4, or we'll move a lot closer to step 4. In transition, we didn't have any performance data, so people moved to the step on the band that provided the maximum increase of up to 15%. And some people are sitting on the transitional step, there's transitional steps for the bands in the middle, because otherwise we would have been advertising a lot more jobs, because step 1 is well above 15%. But the intent is definitely for people to move with the first performance assessment onto those higher steps. Okay? So there's a sliding scale across the bands. The first thing that we discovered when we started to construct the bands is at the bottom of the scale, if we were benchmarking, government had originally made a decision to benchmark at 75% of the private sector. That was the recommendation of the World Bank report. But when we started to construct the bands, we discovered that we're already paying above 100% at band A and B. So we're not going to take them backwards. Okay? So we have a sliding scale. At the bottom of the scale, we're now paying about 120% of the private sector. At the top, on bands M, N and O, the ones right at the top, we're paying about 60% of the private sector. In the middle, bands F and G, we're paying 100% of the private sector. So that's how benchmarking works, and on a sliding scale, on average, we've benchmarked to 94% of the private sector. Okay? So some bands are closer than others, but it's that middle where most people sit that we're on about 100% of the private sector. Okay? So step 4 is a really important step. It's the step that we construct everything around. So step 4 is the benchmark, and then steps 1, 2 and 3 are percentages of step 4, and so are steps 5, 6 and 7. When the jobs were evaluated, the evaluators didn't know the dollars. So when they were assigning the scores for those factors, they knew that a job was going to come out at band F, but they didn't know what money would attach to that. So it kept it quite independent, and that's why we're reasonably confident that like jobs are sitting on like bands. So in transition, like I said, people went to the step that gave them the maximum increase of up to 15%. So that's there was a policy released about 6 months ago saying that that's how it would work. And further increases are based on performance. So people who were on a higher step in the old scales, yes, they've probably still gone to a higher step in the new bands, because it was simply in transition the step that gave the maximum up to 15%. And performance will determine what step you go to next. So we mentioned before, all positions where there's an increase of over 15% have to be advertised. So this is across the whole civil service. This is not just related to teachers or nurses or any particular occupation. This is across everybody. The snapshot that you have, what we've shown with some of the jobs is where the increase is more than 15%, we've then shown what band you would be issued your contract at. So that you'll see if, for example, in the snapshot, if you look at band G, I'll pick on the specialised nurses, the increase is 49%, so they'll be issued a contract at band F, but then you'll get an acting letter, okay, to act on the higher salary because it's above the 15%. So your substantive contract still gives an increase, and then you act on the higher salary until the ministry completes the merit recruitment process for those jobs that are over the 15%. It's important that we make sure that we get the right people. If we're paying 50% more or 60 or 70 in some cases, we have to make sure that the right people are in those jobs. In health and education, there was an exemption given. There's no need to necessarily do an expression of interest. For those acting posts, the letters are issued automatically to avoid disruption in services. But in other ministries, there is a need to do an expression of interest, unless, of course, there's no one else who can do the job. So permanent secretaries are working through that process at the moment. But, for example, we have a number of deputy secretaries who are now, where their previous job went up by a significant amount, so they're on the redeployment list, but there was an expression of interest called to see whether they would act or whether they would immediately move to other duties within the ministry. That's not obviously how it's operating in health and education, because that's not practical. So this is just to, we're almost at the end and then we'll take general questions. So just to let you know that there's a lot of other things happening in ministries. Okay, so apart from the job evaluation and the guidelines, ministries are also working on business process improvement. So where the Minister was talking about multi-skilling and getting people to do new work, ministries are working on that through business process improvement. So we have a technical advisor who trains the staff in the ministries on how to map their processes, how to identify the problems, and therefore how to identify what can be improved. This is actually part of the Permanent Secretary's performance assessment. Their assessment with the Public Service Commission requires that they review and improve a certain number of business processes every year. So that's part of trying to improve service delivery. There have been a number of institutional reviews done in ministries. So most ministries have had a report. A team comes in from the World Bank and they do a review looking at structural and procedural changes that are needed to operate in a devolved system. Because the Public Service Commission's gone, there's certain things that have to be done in ministries that used to be done at the Commission. So some ministries are seeking external support. So like the Ministry of Health have had a second consultant come in to work on some structural changes. The Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation are having someone coming in to help them with their structure. And the Ministry of Education have got 2 big reviews coming up. Senior management, your senior management would be able to tell you. So this is the sort of information that needs to come through at ministry level. So like the Ministry of Agriculture, for example, they've said they don't need assistance. They're able to implement the recommendations in the report through their own structures. Same with Rural and Maritime, they've said that they don't need any assistance, that they will do it through their own systems. But so all of these ministries already have their reports, and some of you may have participated in the reviews when they were done last year. So, more information, if you want more information. The Reform Unit, we regularly conduct sessions. We have a team of information officers who go around and conduct sessions. We do it on a request basis, so all you need to do is contact us and we will organise a suitable time and a team will come out and give you an update. We also run lots of training, in partnership with the Ministry of Civil Service. So the Reform Unit doesn't report to the Ministry of Civil Service, we sit within the Ministry of Economy. But the Ministry of Civil Service has a training unit and they run training like CV writing and interview skills. So if you're going to be applying for jobs, you need to look at whether you can attend that training. We're promoting that training for them. The discipline training was mentioned before, so there's quite a lot of change in the way discipline is managed, so it's important that all supervisors and managers attend discipline training. And we have an inquiries email for any specific questions that relate particularly to you and your circumstances, if you want us to investigate something for you or to give you more information on what's happened with the reforms, or perhaps there's something with the presentation that you weren't sure about, you can use the email address to contact us. So,
I just wanted to make a few comments. The civil service reform with this pay rise is costing us in excess of about $145 million. So that essentially means that from every year onwards now, we just added another $145 million more to our budget to pay for your new pay rises. Of course, our ability to be able to increase that, to create better terms and conditions, will also depend on how well as civil servants. The government revenue has tripled in the past few years. We used to collect in 2004 about $1.2 billion as government revenue. Today we're collecting about $3.8 billion in government revenue. That obviously has given us the ability to be able to give people the new pay rises, and we can actually do a lot better than that, of course. But the economy needs to grow. I know many of you, because of unions, have been led to think that money may grow in trees. You can pull figures out from the sky. The example that I did give, I mean, this lady is questioning who's no longer in the civil service. With respect, you are no longer in the civil service. The point of the matter is this, that no other civil service reform in Fiji's history since since the Ratumara government days, has given any group of civil servants a pay rise that goes up to about 70%. No, at no point in time has there been a recognition, for example, of specialization within the nurses themselves. Not the way that this reforms is done. It's unprecedented. Surveyors today being paid in excess of $40,000, they would have never thought they'd get paid this much. Nurses getting paid about 70% pay rise. Principals of schools getting paid about $50,000, $60,000, $60,000. They never dreamt of getting this kind of pay rises. And this has happened. With respect, you simply cannot come along and say the starting salary is only very little. You compare it and go to the private sector. Compare it to other places. And then if you look at the system actually rewards you as you actually build up your career. The more specialized you get, the more salary, the higher the salary band you get into. That is how the system works. So please understand that. I mean, it's ridiculous because when we put up, for example, the meal allowance from $9 to $20, I had one unionist saying, well, yes, it's good, but they should have asked us first. Why? As a responsible employer, we believe we need to pay you the right salary. As a responsible employer, we can go ahead and do these changes. As a responsible employer, we have actually engaged people who are experts in this area. We've had widespread consultations, public consultations about many of these issues, and we've come up with a system. What we need people to understand is firstly one thing. Just because something has been done for a number of decades in a particular manner, it does not mean that's the only way to do things. There are many ways to skin a cat, as they say. Just because we're a small country, it does not mean that that's the way we should do things forever, in time. We need to look beyond that. We have a great opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to become like a mini Singapore, but in fact better. Everybody talks about Singapore. Singapore does not even have its own water to drink. They bring it from Malaysia. They can't even grow their own vegetables. When the military wants to do jungle training, they're going to hire jungle from Indonesia. That's the point of difference. We now have doctors who were given about 2 years ago about an 80% pay rise, the top-notch ones. They've got another pay rise now this week coming out. I agree. Of course, nurses are an integral part. So are doctors. So are marine scientists. So are foresters. So are many other people. In the same debate we had, some teachers were saying that primary school teachers are more important than secondary school teachers. Secondary school teachers saying we are more important than primary school teachers. That argument will take place. But the reality is, are we rewarding people? And yes, we are. A primary school teacher has the task of molding a very young mind, having to deal with kids who may not necessarily know discipline. On the other hand, high school teachers may need to deal with teenagers who may be going off and getting pregnant. You've got drug issues, discipline issues. So everybody has its own set of challenges in any job. The reality is, are we recognizing people for those skill sets? Are we now on a path where it gives you as individual civil servants, not those who've retired, but those who are within the system, whether they are actually been given the motivation to do better, whether they're going to be treated fairly within the system. We have people, I've had so many people come to me previously and say to me, that person got the promotion because he's Itoke, or that person got the promotion because he's Indo-Fijian, or that person got the promotion because the supervisor is from the same province, or they go to the same church, whatever it is. We have to get rid of that. We have to get rid of that. That's the only way we'll modernize. And the OMRS system actually does implement that. It may not necessarily give you the perfect result first up, but there are mechanisms within the system that correct it. And this is what you need to be asking, is there channels of recourse? If I feel aggrieved, have I the ability to be able to challenge it? Are there ways of appeal? What are the ways that my rights are safeguarded? If a particular ministry is not doing well, if a particular permanent secretary is not performing well, that needs to be brought to our attention. We'll fix it up. Just because somebody within the system is not doing their job does not mean the system per se is wrong. It's very, very important to understand. Let's not personalize matters. It's a system that is very, very important. So, ladies and gentlemen, normally with these things, we normally run a short presentation for you on the budget, but we'll do the questions first, and then very quickly we can take this with the